Cooking on one of these old stoves is like having a friend always with you in the kitchen. That's a comment one wonderful viewer made last time we cooked in the cabin. Diane is absolutely right. These old stoves and these even older recipes, they're temperamental, but they're charming beyond belief. Today we may be cooking solo with just the wind on the prairie and this old stove to keep us company, but the magic is just beginning. So let's crack open a very old cookbook and make pioneer waffles, along with a poor man's syrup that I have never heard of before, and maybe some sage breakfast sausage from scratch, too. It's an ice-cold day outside, but if we huddle close to the stove, today may be a perfect slice of solitude. Sometimes a little bit of solitude is just the ticket. Well, I've walked into a frigid cold house this morning. The winds are howling outside and the snow has packed its way in. Anywhere there's a little sliver of a gap, the wind has blown the snow in. So the top of the cook stove has a solid mound of fresh snow on it. But luckily it's so cold in here, it hasn't melted yet. So let's get this stove fired up and ready for the day. Now, to any of you out there thinking, oh, this is just horrible, it's impossible to live like this, this is how people lived. It's definitely not ideal. You don't want your cast iron to get wet, especially your cast iron stove. But the reality out on the prairie, especially during the homestead era, was the wind would howl and the snow would blow, and your house was very likely to leak in some way. These are old-fashioned natural materials, right? Those of you out there with cook stoves, you'll know when you've bumped the cook stove, you get a permanent little tattoo for the rest of the day. I was reading through old homesteader letters compiled into a book, and this one woman is writing back home to her family on the East Coast, and she's saying how they've built this amazing stick-built house, and it has windows, and it's 2 stories, and they're so proud of it. And they're living out on the prairie, and towards the end of the letter, she admits that the house is so cold that her and her husband have gone back to living in their dugout, which is, basically a hovel built under the prairie earth, just in order to keep warm for the winter. So this is something people experienced. And it came as a shock, even back then. So people would have been used to having to deal with stuff like this, having to deal with a lot of hardship. So in my small way, I get to participate in that. And I do feel like I learn a lot from it. But life around here isn't all drudgery. I have an early Christmas present to open. Robbie found a treasure that I thought was impossible to have out here in the cabin. At our local library, they have this glass case, and inside is an old cookbook published here in Lewistown. It was compiled by all the wives and mothers and cooks in the town, and the First Presbyterian Church put it together and turned it into a cookbook. So this was the earliest cookbook I could find from right here in Montana. This edition is 1907. Robbie scoured different booksellers and he managed to find a copy of it that we could actually take home. Because of course the one at the library is too old and too valuable to be checked out. But this one's ours. And we'll get to keep it and use it here in the cabin. Waffles! There's a handwritten waffle recipe in here. That is awesome. Our buddy Clayton found an old early 1900s cast iron waffle maker, and I've been dying to try it out. But it's one of those things, I have never used one, and waffles are intimidating with a modern electric waffle maker. They're not always that easy to do. So with a cast iron one that works directly over the fire of the stove, I'm a little nervous. I can still see my breath. Woo! Okay, considering how cold it is in here, I'm gonna let this waffle iron slowly warm up, just so we don't get a sudden shock of going from below freezing to super hot over the fire. So I'm gonna let that warm up a little bit, and we're gonna whip up the waffle batter. There's 2 recipes to consider, so I wanna look at both of them and see which one is gonna be the best for today. I brought a bunch of different ingredients. I've got eggs from chickens on the ranch, and butter, buttermilk, flour. We should have everything we need. This is a simple meal in one sense, but difficult to do correctly in another. There's these little notches, and it looks like these notches should fit together when I clip this down, but they don't. There's just always a gap. So I don't know, that may come back to haunt us. These old tools are never easy. They are the best. I will say till I die that old woodworking tools and cast iron tools are the very best, but they take a little something called skill and experience, and when you don't have it, they don't work. All right, now I'm even more afraid than I was. Okay, if we don't get this iron to the right temperature, the whole meal is gonna be toast. So now that it's nice and warmed up, it needs to go straight over the flames to get hot. We need to heat one side and then the other. Butter goes on each side to hopefully prevent sticking. Ow! Burned myself again. Ouch! Alright, gotta learn my lesson here. Lift up, spin. Whew! I have burnt knuckles for the next week. One and 3/4 cups flour, baking powder, salt, milk, 3 eggs, a bit of melted butter, sift dry ingredients. It's a pretty simple one, pretty simple. Okay, so one of the recipes involved whipping egg whites in order to lighten the batter, and I'm not really interested in doing that in this cabin today, but it does remind us that, before chemical leavening, before things like baking soda, baking powder, the only way to make light and fluffy waffles was to whip air into your batter, and that was just muscle and time. You may see sausages crackling in the background. Why not make a proper feast out here on a cold, frosty day? So we take sage picked from the garden that has dried by hanging from the rafters, and we crumble it into the ground pork. Thyme goes in next, then salt and pepper. But before I blend all this together, I must get a big pan of hot washing water going. There's no running water in the cabin, so that means planning ahead for messy work. Let's flip this waffle. I can't relax yet. Goodness, I hope the iron is working with the temperature just right. Ooh. In addition to the sage and thyme, I'm putting a little bit of brown sugar in, and then plenty of salt and pepper. Whenever I do this, it reminds me of my friend Sienna from North Dakota, who always says, season it like sausage, when she means add a ton of salt and pepper. Ow. Ow. A little bit stuck. Oh my goodness, it worked. Woo-hoo-hoo-hoo. That first waffle is stunning. It's puffed up perfectly, but I can't eat it. It's the sacrificial waffle. Even though I scrubbed this old set of irons and seasoned it well, I'd just as soon give this artifact from history a pass on its first food item in decades. Who knows what's been in this thing? The second waffle, though, that will be all mine. Okay, while that second waffle is going and the rest of the food is cooking all the way through, let me give you guys a quick tour of this cabin. We've actually had some people ask about it, and it's going to be a quick tour because this cabin is 16 by 20 feet, and it dates back to 1889 during the homestead era of the Western frontier. If you guys watched our year-long renovation process, we recently completely redid this place and salvaged anything we could. So there's some new, there's some old, but hopefully you guys can see that we've tried to respect history wherever we could, even to the point of suffering through no insulation, which may be crazy, but it's the route we chose. Between the wind and it being well below freezing, it is cold out here, but it's a beautiful day. All is quiet, and really it's just me out here today. Robbie's got the kids in town, so I'm just gonna spend a quiet day out here. It's funny, it's so cold and quiet. The snow just makes everything on the prairie silent. All I can hear is the wind whipping over the roof. I'm being buffered a little bit as it hits the house, and I find myself whispering. I don't know why. There's some sort of magic to it. There's some sort of reverence to the silence. I definitely feel it when I'm out here. It is a completely different way of life to the modern world. The wind out here is howling, but I need to cut some bigger chunks of wood for the cook stove. Using the small kindling, especially the dried offcuts from the wood shop, they just burn too hot and too fast. So we're gonna use some bigger chunks of pine because pine is all we've got. This one's a little big, but it might fit in the cook stove. That'll fit. This east wall is where the original front door was, and in fact, this door is still the original. We took every board and put it back in the same spot. So there's a ton of history right here. And this wall is where we have our kitchen. So our dry sink, different flour and sugar and spices sit here. This is the south-facing window. This is exactly the same size and dimension as was originally here. And this window looks out onto the hay fields surrounding it. But now that it's wintertime, the cattle are gone and it's just a snowy landscape. We have the elk rug down on the floor, the bunk beds Robbie made for the kids. Out the west-facing window, we capture the sunsets as it goes down over the mountains there. We have the pots and pans and plate racks and all the hanging tools, some new, some old. It's all a mixture, really, of beauty and function. And then we have the north wall. Now, the north wall is the original wall. We literally folded this wall over from the existing homestead house, carried it away, and when foundation was rebuilt, we carried this wall back. So every board, every nail is in its original spot. And the prize of the whole place is this cook stove. Now, we don't know where the original stove was in this house. It's possible it was in the little lean-to that was tacked on sometime later, but they surely would have had something for heat, because you can't survive out here without it. And some way to cook. You can see on the days when it's windy, even the candle notices it inside the house. All right, let's check on our brunch and see if it's done. Perfect. Perfect! Of course, no waffle is complete without syrup, and this is a little bit different version. Okay, this is the moment of truth. Steaming hot waffles with a pioneer version of syrup, ranch eggs, and sage sausage. Not raw in the middle, which has been one of my big failures over time. That syrup is really good. I don't know if I did it right. I just winged it based on what one of our viewers, Diane, was saying. You take brown sugar and cream and you heat them together, and it works. Because of course, back in the old days, especially out west, we don't have maple trees. So something like maple syrup, it was hard to get. You couldn't make it yourself and it was expensive to bring in. So people came up with other inventions for their syrups, including some very disgusting ones. I've read about one called lick that is animal fat, like tallow or lard, mixed with sugar and sometimes molasses. Anyway, we're gonna have to try that one of these times, but I can't say I'm looking forward to it. I think that's one of those foods you eat when you have absolutely nothing else in the pantry. Well, for all the fear I had, I can say that these waffles turned out as good as I could ever have hoped. The recipe worked. The waffle iron worked like a dream. I thought they were gonna stick and turn into an awful mess and spill out all over the cook stove, and none of those fears came true. It worked. But thank you to Diane and to all those viewers who left comments on how to get this cook stove to work its best. We've set up a small online store full of handmade items. Only things made by us and good friends with small wood shops and weaving studios here in Montana. If you appreciate fine crafts like hand-carved spoons or woven kitchen towels or beeswax candles made right here in the cabin, then this is the site to peek at. The link is in the description of this video, and we keep selling out of everything, but we work just as hard to restock it. So if you missed something, check back again. I hope I'll see you guys next week when we cook again in the cabin.